This is Chuck Nicole. It is September and it's almost fall. Welcome back, everybody, from a brief respite from these wonderful meetings. You will see on your screen the next two meetings are scheduled for October 15th and November 19th. Marcy, when do we plan on starting in-person meetings? I know we had talked about it, but I'm not sure if these are in person or are these still virtual.
These are going to still be virtual. I think we were talking, and fingers crossed, that we'll be able to do our December meeting
Okay.
in person.
Okay, great. Well, we have an exciting panel this morning on the wonderful world of 3i, or as the band is known as Third Eye Blind. There you go. So I went in and turn it over to Debbie from Arcadis, who will introduce our panel and distinguished guests. Thank you, everybody.
Good morning, all. Thanks for joining today. We do have an exciting talk this morning. I have been talking with Kim Hudak, the Assistant Director of the Water Permitting and Enforcement Division at DEEP, and she and her team are here to give us an update of progress that has been made and some changes that will be occurring to the 3I process, which is the permit modification. So Kim, I'm going to pass it over to you to introduce the rest of your team.
Okay, thank you, Debbie. So one last check. I don't think Nancy is in, so we'll begin. I'll take over and start off with, yes, it's the 3i blind, but not anymore. It is not a blind process. What we're going to offer to you today is, first the team, let me get that over. We have Patrick Beeger will also be speaking. I will be replacing Nancy Wallenberg, who's a lead in the pretreatment permitting. Michael Hart, who's the supervisor of the NPDES and UIC permitting group. Seth Jones is on the call. He is our newest pretreatment engineer. Also, we had in the past George Meadows, who worked hard on this in the beginning and now has gone on to Salt Lake City, working as a similar sanitary engineer there. And I don't see Michelle Gore, the supervisor of, oh, there she is, the supervisor of the pretreatment permitting group. Nancy Wallenberg is on. Nancy, can you hear me?
I made it on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Can you see the screen?
I can see the screen. Unfortunately, my video isn't working, so I can't show my, not that I really care to anyway, but my face.
Oh, well, since I did the introduction, are you ready after the stress of not getting in to start the presentation?
Well, while Nancy settles in, let me just acknowledge too that we have our Deputy Commissioner Betsy Wingfield with us as well on this call.
Oh, there she is. Okay, I'm sorry, Betsy. I didn't see you. You ready, Nancy?
I'm ready.
Okay.
So thank you, Kim and Ozzy, for introducing everyone for me. And so, okay, you're on the first slide. And so I can just say next slide and that works?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So thank you for having us. We're here to provide an update on the improvements. Wait a minute, I have something in front of the screen. There we go. Improvements that we've made to the 3i determinations process. And today, Patrick Beeger and I will be presenting a short presentation. It's less than 10 minutes. So we ask that everybody please save all questions until the end. We'll have plenty of time for that. We're going to breeze through this and then you can ask away. So you can go to the next slide, please. So a couple of years ago, CBIA had reached out to the department and they highlighted that the department needed to evaluate the 3I determination process. So just to give a little more information, the 3I process is based on the state regulation RCSA 22A 430-3I. And there are two subsections specific to the process. 3I2 is specific to process changes that may result in a discharge beyond permit terms and conditions. And section 3I3 is specific to changes to wastewater collection and treatment systems. Next slide, please. So CBIA brought the following information to the department's attention. Permittees need flexibility when they're making changes at their facility in order to make changes in a timely manner. And permittees also needed improved guidance from the department on when these notifications of these changes would need to be submitted to the department for an evaluation. Next slide, please. So based on this great feedback that CBIA had provided to us, we made the following improvements to the 3I process. We've established a clear distinction between what is considered a significant change and what is considered a non-significant change. So the significant changes would require a submittal to the department and an evaluation, and a non-significant change would not require a submittal, and these changes could be made by permittees without the department's approval evaluation. We've also developed new tools to help permittees evaluate if their changes are significant or non-significant. We've developed a shorter application, so this is beneficial to permittees because obviously a little less paperwork is good for everyone, and it also will still be providing the department with the information we need to make these evaluations. And lastly, the department is going to be able to focus its staff resources on the significant changes, and we will not be evaluating applications for non-significant changes. So we feel like these new tools that we've developed are going to be providing enough guidance to permittees to allow them to figure out if they have a non-significant change, and the tool then directs them that you can make that change without submitting an application to the department. Next slide, please. So the new tools that we've developed are a new informational fact sheet, a new guiding checklist, that shorter revised application, and then a revised instruction form for that shorter application. And we're going to go into a little more detail in these next slides, so you can go to the next one. So the new fact sheet specifically discusses when a notification to the department is required. It talks about, okay, if your change is significant, you're going to be submitting an application. If it's non-significant, do not submit an application. And it provides a lot of great examples of what these non-significant changes are. Next slide, please. And the new guiding checklist, which actually I am most excited about because, you know, we have current fact sheets and applications and instructions, but this is a totally new tool. And it's 9 sections of commonly requested changes, and the permittees would pick the applicable section to the change that they're going to make, go through these yes or no questions, and this form is going to tell them if they have a significant change or a non-significant change. And then it's going to instruct them, if this change is non-significant, you're not submitting an application, you can make your change. It's also important to note with this checklist that permittees can keep this on site in their paperwork to document the decision that was made and that it was based on our guidance. Next slide, please.
Okay, and here's just the first pages of the new updated application and instructions. The application actually has a reminder to complete this checklist beforehand, so you can just kind of know if you actually need to submit the application in the first place. We can go to the next slide. The major changes to both the application and the instructions are that we removed the POTW notification attachment that was at the end of the 3I application. We've looked at that and saw that most of the information could just be included in the application itself, and we've added just a clause in this signatory section that would just state that the application itself was also just submitted to the POTW. This is just so that instead of having to check, get the POTW sign off, we at Deep can just go and contact the POTW and see if they've received it. This will save some time in both just having to do extra paperwork, and for us to actually, go and check and then try to get all this additional information from a different attachment. We removed the discharge summary table. This was the table that was asking for if there was any parameters that were in violation in the last 2 years. When we were originally starting up this project, we were getting a lot of comments from this group and other permittees about what they would like to see changed, and this is one of the big things that we were getting a lot of questions on, and people didn't quite know how to fill out correctly or what we would actually want in the information. So we decided to remove the table and instead input just 1 or 2 questions asking about the parameters, because this table is something that us at Deep could easily get on our own in just a few minutes, so no reason to have this duplicate information being submitted again. We've separated and refined a bunch of the application questions. We've added a lot more yes or no's, if yes, answer the next question. If no, you can just skip down to the next question, go to the next page, just to help ease of just readability and just ease of submitting this application. We'll also make it a lot easier on our part to actually review as well. And then we've been updating the instructions to reflect any of the changes that were made to the application and to just help readability a little bit to make it a little less confusing when going through the instructions itself. Go to the next slide. So the positive impacts of this is that we have a shorter application. I think we cut down about 3 to 4 pages, which is just, good for everyone. It's much easier to complete. You don't have to go and, search 2 years of background history. You don't have to answer every question when it's not applicable to what you're asking for changes anymore. We're actually getting, well, at least from what we've seen, we're going to get better information. We're actually going to get what we need to give a response to the application without having to go a lot of back and forth between us and whoever submitted it, because a lot of the times we're seeing that even with the questions that were asked on the application, we still need more information afterwards to actually complete our review. And we're hoping that this will also just lead to a quicker review of the application in general, so we'll be able to get our responses back to whoever has submitted it in a more timely fashion, so they can go and get their major changes done without having to wait a month to hear back from Deep. Next slide. And then this is where we're hoping to post the new 3I tools. We're going to have it linked to the industrial wastewater webpage. So this is the Deep external webpage. If you search Deep and go into the industrial wastewater subsection, it should be there. And the link should also be maintained where you can currently find them, which is where you will find the permit application. And there's a sub bar that will give the 3I application, 3I fact sheet, and we'll be adding the 3I questionnaire and the 3I, actually instructions there as well. So you should be able to find them in 2 different places on our website. Next slide. If anyone has any questions, this would be the perfect time.
Thank you, Patrick. And Nancy, we did get a couple of questions ahead of time. I'm going to turn it over to Wojtek to start the discussion there. In the meantime, if anyone has further questions, feel free to add them to the chat or chime in after Wojtek.
Well, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yep. Good morning.
Good morning. Well, thank you for joining us here today. And as Debbie said, if you would like to share questions with me or her, you can submit it via the chat. And I'd like to just start with a couple of questions from myself. So given that all the comments that were submitted previously and all the feedback by the key stakeholders on this topic. So without diving into the details of everything that was changed, is it safe to assume that most of the comments and feedback that were shared with the department have been considered and are now considered incorporated into the latest changes that are being shared?
I can answer that unless Ozzy, you want to.
Yeah, either of us. I think the short answer is, Wojtek, that yes, absolutely. We gave a couple of opportunities for soliciting input from our key stakeholders, and we thank you for that. And so it was with the help of CBIA that facilitated that interaction, and we considered all the comments, and we carefully considered every single one, and we evaluated them. And what you will find in our instructions and guidance and checklist is a reflection of how we would handle each of those instances. So I think that you will see in the documents that that we also provided in preparation for this presentation. We have provided copies of all of these tools that Nancy discussed in the presentation. Marcy, we shared it with Marcy, so it's available for distribution, and we're in the process of getting these same documents and tools posted on our website at those links locations that we had identified in the slide that Patrick presented. So I think that should cover it. But thank you for everyone's input on that.
And can I just add a little to that? We did deliberate on, because we had solicited information on what people considered significant changes and what people considered non-significant changes. And we had plenty of time to do this. We were going back and forth with the folks who had supplied us the information, and I think everything kind of fell off right about March 2020, when things were getting ready to move forward. So we as the department had a group of people who worked on 3 I's and knew a lot about what they liked and didn't like, and it's their input and many meetings and deliberations internally about how to deal with significant and non-significant and where the line could be drawn. And I think that's where Patrick showed there's 9 areas. We kind of grouped things together that we saw a lot of, and it was much easier to say what was not a significant change. So we made our questionnaire or our checklist geared one way. So if you say that it's non-significant, then you know you don't have to send anything in. And we think that's important too, because there's so many different changes that could be made that could be significant. We didn't want people to not ask if they thought it was significant. They can ask us. That's the point. So non-significant was easier to say. If you're non-significant, don't submit it. If you're significant or you don't know, then it's better to contact us or submit. So that's what we want, and that's how we set it up.
Okay, and I think if I recall correctly, there were 3 significant changes that were considered in the past as significant. So if you were introducing new chemicals or introducing a new process or making significant changes to your flow, that would definitely be significant. Has that expanded in any way, or are we still looking pretty much at the same thing?
That's the basis, but what we were given for question or example, we were given lots of examples and asking if this is significant, or given opinions of what examples would be significant and what examples would be non-significant. Placement of piping, placement of pumps. When is it a different chemical? stuff of that nature. So they were way more specific in their delineation of what's not significant and what's significant than just those 3 items. But they all were pretty much a version of that only is like, if you do this versus if you do something else. So we tried to answer them as best we could. And of course, out of all the ones we got, there were a few that we couldn't answer because it wasn't posed in a way we could understand it without getting more specific. So that's what we ended up with. And if you look at some of the examples, you will understand this. It's a little more specific than those 3. Let's put it that way.
So given that we are where we are now, what is the next step? Would the stakeholders still have time to review things and get back with any additional feedback, or is what is being presented the final, so to speak, documentation?
We're expecting that this is final, but we haven't. It hasn't been tried by fire yet, so we'll put it out there and expect things to get better.
I actually did not hear last few words that you shared with us, actually.
I said we expect that this is final, but with everything, we haven't tried it yet, and we'll put it into motion, and we're expecting it to work. But as everything, as in life, if things don't work, you improve it.
Okay, thank you. I don't see anything else in the chat. I'm not sure, Debbie, if anybody submitted any questions to you.
I just see one clarification and about the date that changes will become effective. I assume they are effective now, but can you just clarify that? Can we start using the checklist and the methodology that you presented today?
You can use them as soon as they're available. So after this meeting, they'll be available. So that's when I assume you can get them downloaded and use them right away.
And I can touch on that as far as when the documents will be available. I touched base with the staff who can post them on the website on Wednesday. I know she has a lot going on. They aren't up this morning. I can assume they'll be up by next Friday. I mean, I'm guessing I'm giving her time because, like all of us, she's busy. But it's in the works. It's in her queue to be posted on the website.
And I think, Marcy, you have them. If people want them, you can send them.
Yeah, they went out in an email this morning to all attendees.
Okay.
And thank you for sharing those, Marcy. I actually have another question on a different topic. I'm not sure if we could ask for an update regarding the significant industrial users general permit registrations processing and where we are with that.
You're muted, Ozzy.
Thank you very much, Kim.
Yeah.
So we received about 130 registrations under the SIUGP, and we have been going through and processing and going through the review on all of those. I think what we're finding is that the reviews are taking longer than expected because a lot of submittals we received were incomplete. So we are in the process of trying to identify all those areas that were missing signatures, the necessary documentation, and we are in the process of communicating with the registrants to identify where those insufficiencies are so they can have an opportunity to complete that information. So we're actively working on that.
All right, thank you. And I see another question in the chat. Back to the latest information on 3I notifications. So if people are still unclear whether to submit or not based on the latest forms and instructions, who is their contact? Would they be contacting their permit writer or the inspector, or if there is none of the above, would they be contacting someone specific at the DEP?
Permit writer.
And that would be,
There's not a, if your permit was issued and does not have an assigned compliance schedule. So for example, we've had many changes within the pretreatment program over the past 3 years. The person who wrote your pretreatment permit may no longer be within the program, so they're no longer your program contact. I would suggest that you call the department's, our divisions, our water permit enforcement division's engineer of the day. If you are currently working through a renewal application or an issuance, then contact the assigned permit writer that you're working with. Otherwise, I would suggest calling the engineer of the day.
okay. And I think based on the chat, some people are still circling back to when all of this is effective and ready for use. So we understand from what you told us that as soon as you issue it to the public, it will be effective as is.
That's correct.
And somebody else is asking about what happens when the permit writers change. Is there a list? How do they find out who the new one
Yeah,
is?
so there's no list. And in some cases, we have assigned most of the pending renewal applications that we have in our queue right now. There's a handful that are unassigned, but there's no public list that we can distribute. So I would encourage you, if you're not actively working with someone through a renewal or issuance of a new permit, that you contact the division's engineer of the day. So you call the division's hotline, and you'll be able to talk with someone who's knowledgeable about this process, or that person will be able to put you into contact with either myself or someone else on the team who is.
Right. So if in doubt, if a permittee is uncertain whether it's a significant change and whether 3I or permit modification is required, contact your permit writer or someone at DEP.
No, it would be if you fill out the checklist and you're not sure, then you should apply for the change.
And once people apply, they would have to wait for your response and approval before they can incorporate that process or that change.
Yes, that's the way it was set up. Is we tried to make everything that we could think of in the examples non-significant. You don't have to apply. We know that there's some things that we couldn't possibly figure somebody would ask about. And so if you do the checklist and you can't say it's non-significant, then you should apply. The default would be significant. And then it would go through the process, get assigned to somebody, and yes, you would hear from them. Unless anybody else on DEP has a different approach, because the EOD isn't going to be familiar with all these different scenarios that could come up, because the group couldn't come up with all these different scenarios when we were thinking about it. So
Yeah, and I agree, Kim, that's correct. But the EOD can put the caller in contact with the appropriate staff person within our division. Just one thing I do want to clarify for the group asking this question about can we or can we not go ahead with the change. Please read carefully what the requirements are in section 3I3 of the regulation. That's specific to changes to wastewater treatment, collection, and conveyance systems. So please read that language carefully because there is an allowance for changes to treatment, collection, and conveyance systems. You could go ahead with the change prior to submitting your notification if the change is needed to prevent an imminent violation of your permit or an ongoing violation of your permit.
So are the regulations at 22A or 3I undergoing any changes as well?
Can whoever's typing, please mute yourself?
I'm sorry about that.
I was just going to respond, Ozzy, that there are no changes at this point taking place to the regulations, the water discharge regulations in 22A-430-3I currently.
Yeah, I apologize. I'm the one doing the typing because I'm responding to the chat, so I'll mute myself so I don't cause a distraction.
And we have another question in the chat. Can a permittee simply submit a permit modification request for a significant change without submitting these 3I determination forms to satisfy applicable notice permit requirements?
The department does track the notifications that we receive. So those notifications, when you review the form, they are directed to our central permit processing unit. And as part of that, they do receive a tracking number. So they receive the equivalent of an application number, and they get assigned to staff through the department's internal database for tracking environmental interests. So we do recommend that a permit to utilize that notification form that Patrick presented. A nice thing about this now is we could receive these notifications directly via email. So our central permit processing unit can receive these fully electronically without the need for a paper copy being received.
If that question
It's
sorry.
awesome. Great to hear that, Michelle. Thanks. I have one question about timing. So what is the deep time frame on approval, right? So the permittee may not undertake the proposed modifications until DEEP provides a written determination that either a permit modification is unnecessary or the permittee must obtain a modification. And I think that's in the regulations, but can someone clarify that for the group, please?
I could clarify that, Debbie. So that's true. That language comes right out of the regulations in 3I. And specifically, the regulations in 3I2 do require that the department review the notification for process modification before that modification is made and provide a decision on that notification. And the department is actually held to a timeline for the 3I2 notification processing to 60 days from the date of receipt. Obviously, especially with this streamlined process, the department is looking to provide a much more timely response than what the regulations allow for.
Great, thanks, Michelle. Any other questions that you have, Wojtek?
No, I just maybe would make a comment that from my experience, it is far easier nowadays to communicate with Deep through email than actually trying to get a hold of somebody live by calling. So
I guess a question, a general question for the group. Ozzy, it looks like you're in the office today, but everyone else seems to be at home. Can you clarify what the status is at the Deep these days in terms of working from home or going into the office?
What a loaded question that is.
Yeah, let me address it. First of all, our building is closed to the public, so we are still maintaining those rules at this point until we get further instruction. But we're in a hybrid mode, I would describe it, generally speaking. So we are in the process of altering our schedules, but we already are a lot of us are remotely working, and we expect that there will be a level of remote working that will continue going forward. But we might have an increased office presence over time, and probably in a few short weeks. And we're just finding a balance right now between what is going to work best from our business needs perspective on remotely working and having an in-office presence. So as you might imagine right now, with the building closed to the public, there's not much interaction with the public within the building. And we're finding that there's a lot of efficiencies thanks to the deployment of our technology. So we can get a lot of work done working remotely as well.
Yeah, great. Okay. And then as far as the engineer of the day, how does that work if somebody, I guess, is not in the office?
Nancy or Patrick can answer this because they do man the EOD hotline. So basically, Debbie, we are still monitoring that hotline from home. So we do have access to our office phones. But Nancy or Patrick, maybe you want to respond more specifically.
Yeah,
I can. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Patrick.
I was gonna say, if the person happens to be at home during the day for the EOD call, we have on our laptops like a software that lets us access both our messages and calls that are coming in. Let's say, for example, we do end up missing the call. We also get an email that points us to the voicemail so we can go and receive it. So generally within the same day, and if not the same day, within like a few hours in the next business day, you'll either get, hopefully, I mean, at least that's what I do, is I go and call back everyone if I haven't, if I miss their call, if I was on lunch or something. So we still have access, and we still get all the messages, and we track them all. So generally you'll get at least a phone call back from whoever the EOD was for that day within, at least one business day, if not shorter.
Okay, great. Anyone else have any other questions?
I do. This is Chuck. So this is probably more for Betsy if she's still on. Maybe Ozzy if Betsy's not on. But I know you guys have org charts on the website, but it stops, I think, usually at the division director. And I wonder if there's a way that you can populate that more with people who are in roles below that, and the supervisory roles within the various units and divisions and stuff.
So we'd like to do that at some point, but I can tell you that we're having a lot of changes at our staffing levels over time. And to be honest, I think we don't always have the most up-to-date org chart at any point in time. As Kim alluded to, one of our staff persons that has been with us for 3 years had left and gave us 2 weeks notice and left and is working in Utah. And, I don't think our organization chart is reflecting that. So we don't want to mislead the public. So we're actually trying to move in a direction where we're focusing on the engineer of the day. And, we're trying to see opportunities for leveraging maybe a program email address. So then if you have an inquiry that's specific to an NPDES permit or a pretreatment permit, we're thinking along the lines of having a program email address that you can send to. So then you would get more direct response from the program. But as much as we would like to present an org chart, I think we're seeing significant changes that sometimes it's not always to keep up with. And we don't want to have versions of the org chart out there that might cause some confusion about, what the current status is of our personnel and who to contact.
And I think, Chuck, to add to that, can you hear me?
Yes, Betsy, go ahead.
I think to add to that, we are also basically encouraging staff and programs to have people who do basically a lot of different work and multidisciplinary work. So an org chart is not necessarily going to give you exactly what you're looking for, because a lot of our staff are more generalists than they are specific, because we want to make sure they understand all of the program elements. So I would encourage you to use the engineer of the day. I would also encourage, if you're not getting information that you need, you can always reach out to Kim or Ozzy, or you can always reach out to me. We will make sure you get in contact with the right staff person. And to Wojtek's point, email is a great way to do that. It also allows you to send it to more than one person so people can see the transparency of the inquiry.
Okay, since you mentioned retirements and stuff, and we got all of this stellar group here, anybody that's retiring that you want to mention to us? I know it's in the newspaper, like, for example, Bob Hannon retired, and that created a little issue for the Siting Council going forward. But anything else that you might want to inform the group, since we've got about 70 people here?
So I think the most sort of for the groups, I think many people are aware that Yvonne Bolton retired this summer after a very long career. It was really great that we were able to send her off in a little bit of style. In addition, she was just awarded an EPA Lifetime Achievement Award from Region 1, which we got to celebrate this week, which was absolutely wonderful.
And she's still on the org chart, by the way.
I'm not surprised. We're working on backfilling that position. So the retirements are coming at a fairly rapid rate. I don't have any other specific ones, Chuck, for the group. In a lot of ways, I see that as sort of a personal decision to how public someone wants to be, but we will try to keep you informed, especially as management positions changes and roles change.
Thank you. Anybody else? We have this group here, so and we have another half hour scheduled for this time, so don't be shy.
So yes, I want to circle back to the SIU GP applications, and someone's asking for an update or feedback on their certification, that there are no PFAS, or it seems like some of the applicants are being asked to sample for PFAS, and is that something that will be a requirement going forward?
So yeah, let me start with that. So as many of you know, the PFAS is a suite of substances that we're understanding has an emergent concern to public health and the environment. And so we are in the process of trying to identify where we might find the likelihood of PFAS present in wastewater discharges. So we are trying to leverage all of our permit mechanisms to try to identify where we need to focus attention on the potential regulation of PFAS in the future. Right now, we're just gathering information. And so we are looking at select industries and sectors based on data that's been provided by EPA and what other states have presented on where they're finding the presence of PFAS and wastewater discharges. And we are basically going through our pretreatment universe and our MPDS universe, exploring whether there is a potential for PFAS in those particular dischargers' wastewaters. And right now, we're just gathering information. I think what you will see is that we haven't established regulatory limits yet, because that is still a continuously evolving process right now. And there are health standards that are being updated, and so there's going to be some potential future revisions on those as well. So we're not quite at the place yet to regulate these discharges, and EPA is still developing test methods that would be suitable for use in our Clean Water Act permits, including the pretreatment permits. And if you go to the EPA website, you might have already observed that they proposed a new method, and but it's not going to be official until it's codified in the federal regulations.
Okay, Debbie, Wojtek, anything else for this panel?
No, I don't see anything else. That's all I had.
All good.
Okay, I think I'd just like to say thank you guys very much for working with us on this. I understand it took us a while. I think the pandemic complicated situation, but I think we've ended up in a really good place. And certainly as you begin to use this new process, provide us feedback in terms of how it's going. But we appreciate you bringing this issue to our attention and to your really thoughtful input into it.
So, good morning, everyone. This is George Steer, Command. I have this announcement that I just wanted to make. After working with some amazing people for over 40 years, I just want to say I'll be retiring come December. It was just, I can't find the right words to say what it's been, knowing everyone, in this space. But I know I'm gonna miss you all. But I'll be retiring December 31st after 42 years.
I
Congratulations.
think you got most of us beat.
I'm an old guy.
Maybe not Beth.
It's but it's been awesome. It's just been awesome. Just knowing you guys, just being around, the experience of interacting has been, I'm just speechless. But it's time.
Well, thank you for your service to not only command, but to the CBIA and your past chairmanship and all the insights that you provided to us over the years.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay, I guess we can release our panel now and they can go back to helping us all out. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
all.
Chuck. And congratulations, George. We'll miss you.
Thank you.
So we'll go right into our task force reports, and I think Debbie and Wojtek, you're still up. If you have anything else that you want to go through on your monthly update.
Yeah, so obviously the permit mod was our big announcement today. And Ozzy alluded to if you run down to page 6, Marcy, there has been a validated laboratory method for PFAS, but we don't have the full approval yet. So that's expected in 2022. So we're almost there, but not there. So we'll be definitely keeping an eye on that. And then I guess just as far as the SIU approvals go, I have received a few. Basically what happened, as I understand it, the process is that the state is, although there is the QPE method, they are still reviewing in detail the registration packages. I heard they had some interns that were going through them and doing a sufficiency review and then passing on to engineers, permit engineers. And then I have received, again, a few drafts for review to make sure that the registration approvals are basically what we asked for, right? So if we asked for a waiver, everything was included. So highly recommend that you go through those when you get the chance and just double check it was all correctly incorporated. Anything else, Wojtek?
No, there is, I mean, this was the probably most significant update we could have hoped for from DEEP. I just wanted to remind everybody that the quarter is almost over. So if you are looking to collect stormwater samples, you will probably have a chance maybe one more time before the month closes it in on us.
Okay, thanks, Wojtek. Good reminder. All right, sending it back to you, Chuck. Thanks all.
Thank you.
So before I release you, I think everybody from DEEP is off, but you guys have any reactions to the 3I guidance that you want to share, or do you think it's something we want to look at and maybe get back to them on?
I honestly, right, so we got it this morning, so I haven't had a chance to really
Really?
look
I
through
mean, it's
it.
been at least a half an hour. Come on.
I know. And I'm at
But
the
maybe,
beach on
all right,
vacation.
maybe you guys
so.
just take a look at it and see if we need, if you feel that we need to interact more before it goes final.
Hey, this is Jay Kolowick. Can I chime in for a second?
Go ahead, Jay.
All right. A couple of global things in regard to this is that the last comments that I know of that were submitted to DEP on this original spreadsheet they developed before they even went to the extent of a guidance and fact sheet and registration forms was back in the middle of April, 2020. So we're talking almost 30 months. And what we saw that Marcy put on the webpage this morning was the first time we saw this stuff. And I think that the thing that kind of I find curious is that if people had any knowledge of the general permit negotiations that went on for the SIU and the MIU GPs, and then when those were finally run out the door, it wasn't until after the permits came into effect that DEP issued guidance and forms. And what that turned into is people who have been working with this stuff is, and I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say 25 to 50 question and answers that had to be put on DEP's website because of the ambiguities that were in the general permit when you compared it to what the permit said versus what the instructions to register for the permit said. So I'm not suggesting that it would be that extensive this time around because it's a little smaller universe. But on the other hand, I don't think it's unreasonable to ask DEP to take a pause on this, even if it's for a month, and gather up final comments from everybody who submitted, as Wojtek said, to see what they accepted and what they didn't accept, and maybe even help them eliminate any ambiguities, because the SIU GP process was not easy. Believe me, I worked on a whole bunch of them, and as did many other folks in this group. But unfortunately, I don't know that you're going to be able to get Ozzy to back away right now. I don't know. So it'll just be a bunch of people are going to ask questions, and if DEP thinks the questions are significant enough, maybe they'll put a Q&A on the website like they did for the SIU and the MIU. I don't know.
You don't remember us having a meeting with the...
Sorry? I can't hear anybody.
Jay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
This is Ginny. Yeah, I mean, if I had to put words in Ozzy's mouth, I would think their rationale is that, okay, the one you're talking about was a regulatory change. This is hey, we're handing you something that you asked for that's not a regulatory change, and we made it easier for you, so you kind of get what you get. That's, I think that's kind of where they're at. Here we are, you asked for something and we gave it to you. I agree that we haven't had a chance to look at this, but I would think with all his regulatory changes that this is kind of viewed as a freebie to industry to, hey, we've streamlined it for you.
Well, yeah, you're probably right. I think that certainly it's going to streamline things, but there's, even Kim Hudak admitted, there's still a small universe in the gray area that will require some interplay with the DEP staff, because I think what you want to be able to do is, I think you want to know if there's something that's a little ambiguous. I think you want to interact with the department to get a determination as to whether you even make them think on the run and say, are they going to say, well, submit the form and then we'll decide if it's significant or not significant? Okay, as opposed to having the interaction, and if the answer is it's not significant, then you'll document it. They'll document it on any particular case-by-case basis, and then you won't have to go through the whole exercise of preparing this thing.
Jay, well, a whole bunch of us met with DEP and had a huge...
I can't hear you very well, Wojtek.
It's George. No, this is George.
Oh, hi, George.
But what I'm saying is, though, a whole bunch of us met with DEP and had a significant, and I'm using the word significant this time, discussion on this topic before DEP came out with this. Weren't you part of that discussion? Weren't you part of that group discussion that we met and talked about this?
The last time Kim Hudak released a preliminary spreadsheet that distinguished between significant and non-significant.
No, I'm talking about the discussion where we all met. And
I got no notice of that meeting, and I wasn't at that meeting.
Oh, okay. All right. I'm sorry about that. But there was a huge group of us that met and had a discussion about a lot of the information that you actually saw from the from the documentation that you're seeing. I'm not going to say I remember who were all the participants, but I distinctly remember there was maybe 30 or 40 different companies that were involved in the discussion.
We had a mentoring forum basically where we were talking about different ways to streamline permitting, and it kind of funneled down to 3I changes somehow. So it went.
Yes.
it went from this broad stroke problem, and I think they being deep, they funneled it into this 3I discussion. And then they brought back another iteration of 3I recommendations, and then Kim Hudak sent out the spreadsheet asking for any additional comments.
Yeah, and that was 30 months ago.
Correct.
All right, and I, for myself, I responded to that and heard nothing.
Nor did I. So
provided some additional comments, and I think I copied a whole bunch of people, both DEP and within the E2 group. I'm not trying to tear down what DEP has done. I think that they're going in the right direction, but I'm only pointing out the circumstances that we had when the SIU-GP was issued, and we didn't see the instructions or the forms until 2 months after the permit was issued. And that resulted in, as you well know, this very extensive Q&A that DEP had to put on their website for that permit, primarily the SIU, I think the MIUs also. And in some cases, the permit said something that you had to do and or not have to do, and the instructions said something that was contrary to that. Okay? And the pat answer we got from Ozzy is that, well, we have regulatory discretion. Okay, well, fine. It would be nice to be able to avoid or minimize that whole, back and forth. And if they could have done that, if they released this thing a little sooner.
Well, why don't we do this? Why don't we give everybody the next month, and then we'll get anybody who has comments or suggestions for improvement, come back to our October meeting and provide them, and then CBIA through our subcommittee of whatever will let DEP know that we have suggestions. Is that fair?
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. In fact, ideally, it would have been done. They would have rolled this thing out and say, we want comments within 30 days, but that's not what he said.
Yeah, we don't live in an ideal world anymore, Jeff.
No, I know.
Anyways, all right.
Oh, just one other item. He met when the discussion went to PFAS. Ozzy and Wojtek, you're correct. The EPA has proposed a method, which is a kind of a clone of a drinking water method. And the other thing is that EPA has given notice that they are going to consider establishing pre-treatment effluent limits for PFAS compounds in certain specific industrial categories. But be assured that that's a couple of years away. The one other item is that the requirement to do a PFAS inventory, even if you can't test right now, has appeared in a number of permits that DEP has put to notice. But very honestly, it's been very inconsistent, particularly with metal finishers. I mean, the only area where EPA has said that PFAS have been used in the past and may continue to be used is in one specific kind of electroplating, and that's chromium. Now, but I've seen draft permits that don't have any chromium plating, okay, that they've put this compliance step in, within 60 days, we want an inventory and your best judgment as to whether you have any of these compounds in your raw materials or intermediates or anything like that. But it is a work in progress, and Ozzy was correct. They're not going to do anything with this until they get some additional guidance from EPA and or the POTWs. I mean,
this is Jay. This is Sudeep. Has anyone declined this request? The PFAS sampling request that you know of?
I'm sorry?
Has anyone declined the request? Because as Ozzy mentioned, they're just collecting data. There is no regulatory basis.
Well, no, I think they've reached out to some companies, but on the other hand, they put this requirement as a compliance step in permits that have gone to public notice. So, but to your point, has anybody challenged it? I don't know. I mean, it's certainly possible that, you know, a permittee has got the 30 days to file an appeal of a proposed permit, and then, you know, take what actions are necessary after that, either working it out or, you know, in the worst case scenario, going to a hearing. But I couldn't tell you because personally, I don't have any experience with any of my clients that have actually gotten this, but it has been posted. I mean, if you go on their, you know, public notice website and go through all of the industrial pretreatment permits, possibly even direct, there really aren't any direct ones that are being issued right now.
We have quite a few of these that we received, and some of our clients are saying, why do we need to do this? And I was just curious if anybody else has gone the legal route.
Again, I can't speak to what, I haven't been in a position where I'm a party to asking those questions. Okay.
Thank you.
But that doesn't mean that and like I say, I mean, I've seen two metal finishing pretreatment permits next to each other, and neither one of them have chrome electroplating, and one of them has, you've got to do the PFAS inventory, and the other one is completely silent on it. So, you know, what are the rules? And that's something that is a little difficult to discern at this point in time.
This is Beth Barton, just following up on that question. I wasn't involved in the permit, but doing the same sort of thing that Jay indicated in terms of sort of surfing the internet for examples of permits. I do recall there being one permit where the draft permit had the compliance schedule language, and then a subsequent fact sheet for the final permit indicated that it had been deleted following submittal to the department by the permittee, wherein it demonstrated to its satisfaction that it was not, I mean, these are my words, it's not the way it said it, but that it was not an issue for that particular discharge. So I think there is an opportunity, if not during the course of the process leading up to the draft permit, once the draft permit is out, I think there is the opportunity, if you have a good case to be made, to broach that with the agency, just like there would be for any other provision of a proposed draft or a draft permit.
One thing that people may want to take a look at is that EPA published in September what they call Preliminary Effluent Guidelines Program Plan 15. And within that document, this is how they review what they're going to go forward with in the next fiscal year with pretreatment regulations and effluent regulations in general. And one of the sections in that speaks to PFAS compounds, and it goes through, makes them what industrial categories you might expect to see them in. I don't have a reference number, but I'm sure if you Google EPA pretreatment or EPA effluent guidelines program plan 15, it was just put on their website, and you'll see which categories EPA believes are potential or suspect, call it whatever you want.
So from my experience and the way I understand it, I think DEP's plan going forward is that if you have an individual permit or pre-treatment permit, when you are going to reapply for a new permit, they will ask you to certify that there is no PFAS in your discharges. And I'm not sure how do you certify without collecting samples and verifying, and how do you collect samples and verify when the methods are currently being developed. And so the question about certification or sampling, to me, it's kind of the same. because it boils down to you saying, you know, I'm confident we don't have anything. But how confident are you without sampling, you know, to the levels that are so low, you know, you know, parts per trillion. So I'm not sure how that's going to play out, but I also think that they're focusing right now on processing the general permits, you know, the SIU permits, and addressing those. And if you have an existing pre-treatment permit, they're leaving you alone for now.
All right, Debbie,
I
anything else?
I just want to, if the CAN language that we talked about, if somebody goes, if you go on the DEP public notice website, because this has been noticed, so it's public record already. The name of the company that DEP has noticed the proposed permit on is the Conard Corporation. That's CONARD. And again, you go to the website, you can scroll down and you'll see it there, and you can click up the fact sheet and also the draft permit. And that's one of them that, this is an example, that's one of them that doesn't do chromium plating, but they've got this compliance schedule for doing an inventory of suspected chemicals that suspected formulations that may contain PFAS. So it's sort of it doesn't require any testing, at least not yet. It's saying you don't have to test until EPA, you know, promulgates and, as Ozzy said, formally adopts the method in 40 CFR 136, which is probably, I would guess it's at least a year off. Maybe not quite that long, but we'll see.
And Debbie, I think you shared an article about DEP going and sampling different areas, different sources, and to Sally's point, you know, they're sampling POTWs, and I think the focus is on actually, you know, if you're providing drinking water, you know, they're sort of focusing on those sources first. And I'll be interesting to see maybe a map in the future that kind of makes all that information public so people can see it.
This is Sally. I'm having trouble with my audio. Can everybody hear me?
We can hear you.
So I had a conversation with Ray Freegon earlier this week because, yes, Weston and Sampson will be sampling at least Hartford Water Pollution Control. Pequannock kind of some misinformation because after the spill in 2019, they did do some sampling up there. So Pequannock's one of the 34 that they picked out, but the question now is, are they going to use that data from 2019 or are they going to resample? So we don't know that, but you know, Ray is a great source of information, and yes, they have 2 areas in the state where they found groundwater issues, and they're both associated with AFFF. So, you know, that's the primary concern, and they have their PFAS action plan that's on their website and all. So that was the first thing, and now they're kind of methodically trying to go through, well, what are the next priorities? And so, you know, I asked Ray straight out, okay, if we get, I'll call it an elevated sample at a wastewater treatment plant, you know, what are they going to do? And he said at this point, they don't know. You know, they have their GIS maps where they're putting dots, you know, where they have suspicions of things, you know, folks discharging different PFAS chemicals. So, you know, it's definitely something that's slow. You know, we received letters, gosh, I want to say it was over a year ago to say, you know, we will be sampling POTWs, and you have 2 of the 34 that we want to sample, and then nothing for quite a while. So it is being worked on. But I guess one of my questions for the folks who have talked about the permittees is DEP at this point just asking for a PFAS inventory, or are they actually asking for PFAS analytical results?
Sally, I think I can address that. All of the permits that I have seen that have gone to notice, they've asked for the inventory, and they've said when EPA finally adopts a method, okay, an approved method that we talk about, that if you've responded, I guess if you've responded in this inventory that we think we have some, then when that method is approved, the next step is going to be to sample your discharges for it. So again, that's why I said it's certainly a time off on the pre-treaters. The only one I would offer that is, and I won't, again, it's on the website, you can check it out. It's the Clean Harbors facility in Bristol, which is a centralized treatment system, which, you know, takes, I want to say takes everything but the kitchen sink to treat. What EPA and that draft permit, pre-treatment permit, have said, do an inventory as best you can, because they're taking materials from, you know, customers. But in that particular one, they are telling them that you have to submit a sampling plan to use this, the EPA 537.1 drinking water method modified. And they're not saying that, I mean, up until EPA comes up with the methods. That's the only one I've seen where DEP has jumped the gun and told somebody that they've got to do it now. I think a centralized treatment system is a little different animal than an individual industry.
And Jay and Sally, excuse me, this is Joe Mastrangelo. Jay had actually mentioned Conard Corporation, who is a sort of a new client of mine. I picked them up after they already sort of officially got their NIPTES permit, but it was basically presented to me virtually the same time that I started working with them, and I was going through that PFAS requirement, and I did reach out to the state for some clarification. I'd be more than happy to forward you the response. It's effectively exactly what Jay has said at the moment. There's no sampling requirement at this time, and they don't even go on to define what a qualified professional in the PFAS universe is, and they said that they did that deliberately. So if anyone's interested, I'd be more than happy to forward you the state's response as to what's being required from individual facilities that have a wastewater NIPTES permit, if that's helpful.
That would be great. Just send it along.
I'm also interested.
So
Okay.
it sounds like this may be a nice topic for a future meeting. In many different areas hitting us now. So let's keep that in mind. And I want to move this along and move it over to our Government Affairs Subcommittee, which is John and Ashley. Is Ashley on today, John?
Ashley couldn't make it today, but I'm covering. So
okay,
we're good.
Thanks.
Yeah, no problem. Good to hear from you, Chuck, and good to hear from everybody else. At CBIA, we're in the process now of establishing what our legislative priorities are going into the 2022 legislative session in all our different disciplines. So for energy and environment, we encourage people from the group to go ahead and submit to Marcy anything that you think we should be focused on for the legislative session, either something we should bring up or stuff that you think we should be opposing. So in that process, we also, I've reached out to the department, both Deep and Pure, to set up meetings for Ashley and I to go in and meet with them. Just to, the last year we testified for or against a lot of legislation that came out of Deep and Pure, and I feel that it's good that we actually, Ashley and I, have an individual conversation with the department so they know who we are a little bit better, and that works more effectively than just testifying against any department's bill without having met them. Is not really the best way to approach things, but with the pandemic last year, we were kind of stuck with that. So far, we've got a good response from Deep and Pure about those meetings, so those will be happening over the next month. The other thing that we're paying close attention to where I am is the grid modernization discussions that are going on. I expect out of those particular discussions that there'll be some legislation that comes forward. And lastly, I've reached out to Representative Arconti and Senator Needleman to set up meetings with them to get an idea on what their priorities are for sessions, so we can begin to, get a sense as to what's coming as we head into 2022. And Ashley just couldn't make it today, but she will be at our next meeting, and she would be asking the same thing with regards to anything on the environment side folks can provide with regards to what you think we're going to be facing in the upcoming legislative session or administratively. We'd love to hear from you, and that's about it for right now. If you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
So I know there's been discussion of bringing TCI to the special legislative session, which it doesn't sound like the governor was willing to do, but I didn't know if there was legislative support, although what I hear the Democrats even say they don't have enough votes for it, but I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's been being discussed. I think you hit it right, Chuck. I think the governor didn't bring it forward simply because those votes weren't there at this point. I don't know if they'll give up on that. They've been pushing on that issue for quite a while, but I don't know if anybody else has any insight with regards to that. I see Lee popped up.
I did, because you're stealing my thunder a little bit, but
Well, we can transition right into you because
There
you're
you
next
go.
on the agenda.
Yeah, but Marty Looney's got some pretty good quotes in yesterday's paper about it, but it's not coming in September.
All right, so you're really on, Lee. That was a good segue to you.
Well, I don't know that John's done.
Hey,
Well,
he
I
said he was
certainly
done.
don't want to steal Lee's thunder. That would be a bad move on my part. So I'll stay quiet for a minute. No, I am done. So Lee, if you have anything else, I know you provided Marcy with an example of one thing that we might want to consider during the legislative session, or what we might see on virtual net metering. I don't know if you want to talk to that or anything else.
No, I sent that to you. I do think that we're going to be playing a lot of defense this legislative session, because I do think that there's some crazy stuff coming out, and I was going to bring most of that up in my presentation this morning. The virtual net metering thing is a one-off, John, that I sent to you and Marcy, only because I wasn't going to talk about it in today's session, because I don't think it's broadly applicable. But I do think that we've been stalled on virtual net metering, maybe part of smart grid mod, part of something else. But I think that that's one way to drive down the cost of the continued renewable electricity. But with that, I'm ready to rock and roll if you guys are.
I am ready for you.
Okay. So for the first half of this, I wanted to cover up my face and use slides. So this week, Connecticut released its 2018 greenhouse gas inventory, and it caused a little bit of hue and cry throughout the populace. And Marcy, if you could go to the next slide. Katie Dykes knew this was coming. She was interviewed last week, and when I say on the left-hand side of your screen that Connecticut is not meeting its goals, that's not just me saying that. It's not only the chart that you see that's ripped straight from Deep's report, but it's also Katie herself who said, we are not, quote, we are actually not going to meet our target for 2030, close quote. And she goes on to point out that it's not a particularly robust target of a 45% below 2001 levels. And if you look, 2001 is a pretty high relative to, say, 1990. It's a relatively high number. But as you can see from the trend line, maybe we're going to get to our 2020 goal, because this is 2018 data. But we're certainly not going to get to, we're certainly not in any sort of trend to make it look like we're going to get to our 2030 goal. And the other thing that I'd remind everybody is the last year we have greenhouse gas emission data is from 2018, which was a quote unquote normal year when we weren't doing Zoom meetings and the like, and we weren't working from home. We'll have another year of that same quote unquote normal data, and then we'll have at least 2 years of new normal COVID inspired data that should really skew things a little bit. That said, if you're looking at this chart, you've got a good news, bad news scenario. The good news is that we do have reductions from that peak in 2005 that you see at the top of the hill. The bad news is we've largely been flat since 2012. We kind of sort of hit our goals and got complacent. And there's reasons for that, which you can see on the next slide. So again, these are just taken straight from Connecticut's greenhouse gas emissions report. If you take a look, transportation is far and away the biggest emitter as a sector of our greenhouse gas emissions, and I've harped on that for a while. And we've got the real peak there in 2005 for transportation, and it dropped down till about 2012, and it's stayed flat ever since. What's really interesting is if you take a look at the electricity sector, which is number two, that's dropped. Starting in 2011 with Public Act 1180, we've been focusing on renewable energy. We've been focusing on electric efficiency and other things. And you take a look at what we're doing from the electricity sector, and that really has dropped. And it's a good trend line. How much further that trend line is going to go, I don't know. But there are a lot of people who've taken a look at that residential bump there on the third line down on the far right-hand screen. So for those of you who can't read the screen, the top line's transportation, the second one's electricity, and the third one is residential. And you see that hookup going so that residential looks like it's going to cross electricity consumption in 2019. That's an 18% bump over the course of those couple of years. The rest of the sectors are kind of flat. Commercial, industrial, muni waste, natural gas leakage, and agriculture are all really kind of flat. We're going to talk a little bit about the transportation sector in the next slide, and then we'll talk about that residential piece in another minute. But again, you take a look at the transportation emissions, and you see that bump again in 2005, and a lot of that bump has to do with the fact that we weren't really focused on reducing our greenhouse gas emissions per mile traveled. And that's what the bottom curve shows, is that we've done an okay job from '05 to about 2011, 2012 of increasing fuel efficiency across Connecticut's fleet, whether by federal CAFE standards, adopting the California emission standards, or promoting electric cars. However you want to do that, we've gotten Connecticut's fleet a little more efficient, but we substantially over time, up until about 2012, increased annual vehicle miles traveled. And so the transportation sector remains flat because we had the bump in '05, but then since that time, we've been driving about the same, and we've been keeping our fuel efficiency about the same. So I think the data for 2020 and 2021 is going to show a precipitous drop in vehicle miles traveled because nobody was leaving their house, nobody was commuting, et cetera, et cetera. Nobody's going to CBIA meetings live. We're all doing this by Zoom. But eventually, we're gonna leave our fancy dens with our bookcases, and we're gonna go back to the office, and we're gonna increase our VMTs. And there's a question as to how much the transportation section's really going to continue to dominate, I think, our greenhouse gas emissions. And it's to that end that Connecticut Deep proposed the Transportation Climate Initiative, which they did the last legislative session, and they were pushing it for the September special session that's coming up. And the president of the Senate, Martin Looney, and Marty has his pulse on the finger of the Democratic caucus, not only in the Senate, but also to some extent in the House. And he went out in public and got interviewed and said he's amenable to the concept of the Transportation Climate Initiative, which, for those of you who don't remember, would put a surcharge on gasoline with the hopes that it would curtail people from driving, and that surcharge, a tax by any other name, is a tax. And the petroleum industry did a great job of explaining to the Connecticut residents why it's a tax. And Looney said while he supports the goals, and the caucus supports the goals of the Transportation Climate Initiative, quote, it's not fully put together as of yet, close quote, which I find interesting since it was a fully put together legislative package back this spring. It's clear that whatever Deep gave to leadership leadership wants them to go back to the drawing board yet again. I think the reason why they don't have the votes is because the Dems are concerned particularly about the impact to low and middle income households in Connecticut who would probably feel the brunt of this more. And so, reading through the tea leaves, I think that the Dems are trying to do a tax the rich sort of a thing. And I say that in part because later on in the interview, Looney did say that what he was looking for when it comes to this is, quote, a somewhat more progressive way to package it, close quote. And then he started talking about providing tax credits for low and middle income households, either on your tax bill or through a rebate from your electric bill or some other way. And I very much took that to mean they're trying to come up with a way to tax the rich. And until they do, this thing isn't going to fly. And I'm not sure that it ever needs to fly. And the reason why I say that is because last year, California, to some fanfare, but not a whole lot because it's California, became the first state in the union to ban the sale of fossil fueled vehicles starting in 2035. So, starting in 2035, you will not be able to buy a natural gas fired or a gasoline powered car in California. They have to be zero electric vehicles, zero emission vehicles by then. So electric vehicles essentially, and maybe hydrogen fuel cell vehicles. New York, Massachusetts followed suit earlier this year, and last week New York did the same thing. So New York banned the sale of all fossil fueled cars starting in 2035 and medium and heavy duty trucks starting in 2045, and they all have to be zero emissions vehicles. So now you have Massachusetts to the north and New York to the west that is following the lead of California. And frankly, I'm not sure, given that leadership on this issue, I'm not sure how Connecticut's political class is going to be able to reduce the allure of seeming to be progressive. So if you want that V8 Mustang 5.0, my suggestion would be to buy it soon because I'm not sure how much longer Ford's going to be selling that sucker in Connecticut. You can probably buy it in Texas, however, if you so choose. And then the last slide I've got, I did say that I'd go back to residential, and this slide kind of talks about it. I have on the left-hand side the climate change is real because what you see over time is a trend line as to heating degree days and cooling degree days. And as those names imply, it's a measurement of not only time but also temperature. So a heating degree day is how much and how long you have to heat your home or your business in order for it to be comfortable. So if you have, and it's done over the whole season. So it takes into account, 220-degree days would be wicked cold, but they could be just as bad as 3 weeks of 40-degree days. And so it takes into account both. And you can see the trend lines over time that we have fewer heating degree days, so fewer days that are super cold where we have to heat and fewer periods of time where we have to heat. And we have more cooling degree days, which is the opposite, where we need to run our air conditioners in order to be comfortable. So as I indicated before, the greenhouse gas emissions report shows this 18% uptick in greenhouse gas emissions from residences. One day later, the Energy Efficiency Board has its meeting and it approves the next round of funding that is designed to entice people to switch from their fuel oil burners to natural gas for the heating of their homes. And there was a large contingent of environmental advocates that went ballistic over this. The Conservation Law Foundation, Save the Sound, and others sent a letter almost immediately after the Energy Efficiency Board approved the funding for these improvements to Katie Dykes saying, "Dear Commissioner Dykes, please don't approve what the Energy Efficiency Board did and don't release those funds." The Energy Efficiency Board will tell you that it's complicated, and while we don't want to promote fossil fuel heating of homes, um, natural gas is a hell of a lot better than heating with number two fuel oil. And so this is an interim measure, and it's still better than what we have now. And we would at least blunt the trend line a little bit from the increase it is. And by the way, speaking of 2020 and 2021, I fully expect that that residential number is going to go up because people were living in their homes full time. These advocates are pushing for enhanced building codes, which John will note came up last session and was pushed back. Kudos to John and others, and also for increased use of electric heat pumps for the heating and cooling of homes in Connecticut. The advocates are particularly focused on heat pumps right now because ISO New England just issued its projections on heat pump usage, and it came to the conclusion that by 2030, so projecting out 9 years, but by 2030, only 4% of households in Connecticut will be using heat pumps. But you compare that to 11% in Rhode Island and 23% in Massachusetts. So in Massachusetts in particular, nearly a quarter of the homes will be heated and cooled by heat pumps. And the Connecticut environmental advocates are saying, why can't we be more like Massachusetts? Now, and we can turn off the slides because that's all I've got for the pretty pictures. But I would point out that energy has to come from somewhere. And if we're going to switch our heating and cooling, and we're going to switch our transportation to a mostly to all electric future, we're going to have to radically increase the amount of electricity we're generating, and probably we are way underscoring the need for, or understating the need for battery storage, and 1 gigawatt of battery storage ain't going to get it done neither, particularly if we're going to get our electricity from intermittent renewables like solar and wind. So this is all well and good, and it certainly gives us targets, but I think that the answer is a hell of a lot more complicated than what is being talked about thus far. And with that, I can shut up and take any questions. Was I on mute the whole time?
Silence for Lee. Guess you
Question for Lee.
Yeah, Mark.
Yeah, on the Transportation and Climate Initiative, do you have any knowledge about the highway use fee and how that plays into TCI?
Not yet, because I haven't been paying very close attention to it, Mark, because to be perfectly honest with you, it's an amorphous blob and it's kind of like nailing Jello to the wall. I don't know if John's been paying closer attention to it. I'm not paying attention until somebody comes out with a real proposal. And frankly, I'm not sure that they're going to be able to do that, just given Lamont's inability to get tolls through, I don't know, 2-3 legislative sessions ago. But I don't know, John, if you have more color on that, but it's pretty opaque to me.
Yeah, I agree, Lee. I think, and Ashley's been kind of covering this issue. We were involved in the TCI issue last session, as you know. We weren't in favor of it. Governor's office wasn't too pleased with the position that we took on it, but we stood strong. I think the highway use tax was kind of something we stayed a little bit quiet on because we were fighting the TCI issue, and I don't think they would have been too pleased with us continuing to, push them back on all issues. And we kind of left the highway tax fee issue up to the Motor Transit Authority, MTAC, for them to go ahead and fight. But we certainly were in conversation with them and discussions with them, but it didn't openly come out and oppose it at any point. I don't know what we'll do moving into the next session, but as you know, we're setting priorities, so I'll discuss it a little bit with Ashley and Lee as we head into over the next couple of months as to where we should be on that and whether we should at all get involved in it.
Lee, this is Weezy Nora from Dominion Energy. Just a quick question on the emissions inventory report. There was some talk about the change to the methodology for calculating those emissions reductions. And I just wanted to see if you had any insights on that and, anything at all on how they plan to change the methodology.
To be perfectly honest with you, it came out so recently that I haven't really been able to dive deeply into that. But the big change is how they're calculating the emissions from the electricity sector. And I can get back to you on that offline, Weezy. But I think they're using a little bit of chicanery, for lack of a better term. They used to just look at electric generation and the emissions from electric generation, and now they're trying to do greenhouse gas emissions equivalents based on the consumption of electricity. And candidly, that's probably a better way to do it if we're talking about what are the real greenhouse gas emissions coming off of that, because not everything's coming from the quote unquote generation sector. But I'm worried that they're doing a lot of estimates now rather than actual measurements. It's a hell of a lot easier to measure what is coming out from actual generators, be they fossil fuel or natural gas, oil, what have you, because everybody's measuring those emissions. And I think that they're doing a lot more estimation. But no matter how you slice it, the sector itself is the one bright spot in terms of trend lines that the state can point to. And I think that that's going to continue for the foreseeable future, given how they've structured their procurements and everything else that's going to come online.
Great. Thanks, Lee.
All right,
Appreciate that.
we're ready to move over to waste with Harold and Mark.
Chuck, if Mark is still on the line, I believe he was going to go first.
Well, he
Can
was.
you hear me now?
There he is.
Okay. Good morning. So I'm assuming I'm unmuted, Harold, correct?
Mark, you've got the floor.
Okay. Something that's not on our report, but I think it's worthy of mention, has to do with the permit concierge service. And I'd like to just acknowledge Camille's efforts in bringing the group together and having useful dialogue about the department's efforts to improve permitting. However, I did want to mention a couple of concerns that I have, and these are personal and not necessarily reflective of my employer's views, but I'm concerned about what I would consider to be mission creep. And there's been discussion about including items such as information about enforcement action and information for dissemination to the public as part of the advisory group's purview. So my emphasis in comments that I made to the advisory group is stick with the original intent of the advisory committee and the concierge service, which is that the customer is the applicant, and anything beyond that is extras and possibly superfluous. Clearly, they need to do a better job of providing information to the public, but I don't think that should be within the realm of the concierge service. That's just my personal opinion. Also, I'd like to mention that as an advisory committee, there were a number of recommendations and suggestions, some of which made a lot of sense, some which really had me concerned. One of which was to provide a map online of all the substations in the state of Connecticut, which I communicated to the group my feeling that it's a very bad idea. So in any situation where you have stakeholder and involvement, I think you have to be careful what you wish for, including you. Quiet. So I have a mutt here who has comments about the concierge service. So I may have to transfer over to Harold. But one other thing I wanted to mention had to do with the bottle bill. And the question that I had posed to Ashley had to do with the commissioner's responsibility to adopt regulations to fully implement provisions of, I believe it's Public Act 2158. And it relates to the redemption provisions and possibly to the retail locations larger than 40,000 square feet. And Ashley seemed to feel that the provision regarding commissioner adoption of regulations was a narrow provision, but it isn't clear from the language of the bill. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Harold.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Mindful of time, let me hit some highlights for you all. With respect to release/spill reporting, the hearing officer is still working on a hearing officer's report. So stay tuned. No update, no forecast for when that may be issued. On release-based, on the working group related to the release-based remediation program, the working group is continuing to meet, continuing to deliberate. They last met on the 14th. They are going to meet again on the 26th. They are working through the reports that have been previously provided to them by the topical subcommittees. And as I've said, they are continuing to do their work. If anyone wants to chime in here, if they've got any additional insights, that would be terrific. Otherwise, I'll proceed to the next item. Okay. With respect to revisions to the RSRs, earlier this month, Deep uploaded to the website, and as noted in the task force report, the updated EUR forms. As you know, with respect to the RSR regulations that were adopted, new EUR forms were to be developed to coincide with the development and promulgation of the EUR regulations. There had been a period of time when the new forms were not on the website, had not been developed yet. They are on the website. This is something that we certainly can talk about at a future meeting. UST regulations, revisions to the UST regulations, as we've noted in previous reports, they are working their way through the regulation process. They are now before the Reg Review Committee, and they are up for review on, I believe, September 26th, I believe, 28th, and they are pending before the Reg Review Committee. Finally, and again, recognizing the time, I will just mention this, and this is again something probably for a more in-depth conversation with everybody weighing in. On September 7th, Deep put on their website a document on the affirmative responsibility to clean up pollution, which discusses the liability to the state for pollution and when it's fully discharged. And in that document that was posted on the website, it says that the RSRs apply to any action taken to remediate pollution required to Chapter 446K. Chapter 446K, the Water Pollution Control Act, requires that those who are aware of pollution to abate it. Such pollution is considered abated, and any obligation and potential liability to the state is completely discharged only once the standards in the RSRs are satisfied. This document comes as an outgrowth of a lot of discussion with respect to the RSRs and some of the positions that DEEP was taking with respect to when the RSRs apply. So this is something that we can have a further discussion on. This is a statement from DEEP. It's not a regulation, but it's something that the regulated community, I can say that 3 times fast, should be very much aware of and sensitive to. Certainly, if anyone wants to react quickly to that on this call, please weigh in. Otherwise, unless Mark has something further and has resolved his doggy problem, then I'll kick it over to Air.
Well, thanks. Yes, it is wonderful that DEP thinks the R's apply to everything. But we'll turn it over to Steve and Dave.
All right. Good morning, everybody. Not a lot going on with the Air Bureau, so Steve and I just have a handful of quick updates for you guys today. One thing, I guess, transitioning from waste, just so folks are aware, the EPA issued an advance notice of proposed rulemaking last week, stating they intend to issue regulations, NESHAP and NSPS regulations covering pyrolysis, gasification, and other thermal waste treatment processes. So there are, I guess, equipment and facilities out there that are, primarily using thermal treatment for certain waste streams, biosolids, tires, and medical waste potentially too, that don't actually combust the material and are exempt from incineration regulations, but there are emissions associated with them that EPA has taken a look at. So that was issued last week. And then just as a heads up on SIPRAC, next SIPRAC meeting, there's going to be a discussion on NOx SEMS calculations under Section 22E. So there's kind of a quirk in the Section 22E language that can be a hiccup for how sources that have continuous emission monitors are going to be required to calculate their NOx emissions on a daily basis. So it's in conflict with how certain EPA, NSPS, and NESHAP rules specify the continuous emission monitoring to be done, and as well as several NSR DEEP permits as well. So I don't think it was really thought about when they issued the rule. So they're going to address potentially how to handle when there's going, if you encounter a conflict with either a permit or a federal rule versus what the Section 22E language says about how you should be calculating your daily NOx emissions. And then just another heads up for folks who may have seen this, people that file emission statements. DEEP has been either under an EPA requirement or just being asked by EPA to take a closer look and around how they are doing the Connecticut inventory for fine particulate matter, specifically condensable particulate matter. So for sources that have reported condensable particulate matter emissions on prior emission statements, they're combing through the calculations, and in a lot of cases, requiring facilities to either modify or resubmit their emission statements. Not necessarily that the calculations were wrong, but they want to see the data presented in certain ways that they can then pass through in their inventory reporting to EPA. So there's been quite a few data requests and emails coming out from Steve Potter and Alan Welch in the inventory group, going out to facilities to, in some cases, getting down into minutia of how they reported their condensable particulate matter. So just be aware that if you file a mission statement, you might be seeing an email similar to that come your way. And I think those were the main points we had. And Steve, if you had anything else you wanted to add, feel free to chime in.
Hi, Dave. Yeah, thank you. I thought just to add to the NOx RACT issue, it's going to be interesting to see what DEP does have to say at the next SIPRAC meeting, because that section of the regulations, the whole thing was redone recently, and DEP worked very closely with the regulated community. They're very good about reviewing it, accepting comments, but it's just so difficult to anticipate when you have a non-normal operation. And to give people a better understanding, if you have a cogen with the SIMs, you do a startup, and you immediately develop some kind of a problem, you have to shut down. So you can have 10 or 15 minutes of operation, which gives you a valid quadrant or two, which makes a valid hour. So that 15, 20 minutes of operation becomes a daily block average. And this is very important to major facilities that have cogens. So if please, if any of you are concerned about this, give us a call, Dave or I, and be prepared for the next SIPRAC meeting, because it would be nice to have a larger mob with more pitchforks. So hopefully the DEP will realize this is a problem for everybody and help us with either exemptions or rewriting the terms of the daily block average. Thanks.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Dave. Marcy, John, anything else for the good of the order from the CBIA team?
I think we're good. Just a reminder, if people want to email over some suggestions for legislative priorities, that would be very helpful for us.
Great. Well, we'll talk to you or see you on the screen in October. Thanks, everybody.